All right, well, welcome again to Kaktus Poetry Playhouse, our September features, and I'll let John do the introductions.
Yeah, thank you, Jules. We've got two fabulous features, and one of them, through the magic of Zoom, has transported down from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and will actually be in our studio in a few minutes, Loren Niemi. But before him, it will be from Santa Fe, or just north of Santa Fe, Barbara Rockman. And so I'm going to just get started with their introductions in a minute. Beforehand, I usually read a poem to get things started. And we're very excited that we're publishing Lawrence Welsh's new book, American Skull. And that's an advanced copy. And Jules put in the chat the pre-order link for that. Lawrence is a distinguished poet down in El Paso, and I'm going to read one poem called "After Ghost Train Blues." Some fell off or pushed backwards until only air was known momentarily, until the crash onto stones and steel, and the get up to wake up and see only emptiness or openness that the desert becomes, and says, all right, for this is where I'll rise. This is where at the onset, and this is where at the end. So that's from Lawrence Welsh's American Skull, which we will likely be having. He featured on Kaktus a few months ago. We'll likely be doing a book launch on Zoom as well for Lawrence. Okay, so Barbara Rockman is a wonderful poet and much in demand as a teacher and workshop leader, and someone who's become a friend. She is the author of Sting and Nest, winner of the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award and the National Federation of Press Women's Book Prize. Her second collection, To Cleave, was published in 2019 by the University of New Mexico Press. She teaches poetry and generative writing workshops at the Santa Fe Community College, in various community workshops, and at the Esperanza Shelter for Battered Families, also with OutsideInArts. And she's a graduate of the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA program, and has Pushcart and Best of the Net nominated poems appearing in many journals, including Nimrod, Louisville Review, Cimarron, Thrush, Southern Humanities Review, Bellingham Review, and Taos Journal of Art and Literature. Barbara also has the distinction of having been the last person to read at our previous Playhouse location, actually our house in Albuquerque, before we moved in January 2019. So it's a delight to see and to hear Barbara again.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, so this is great. I'm so happy to be here. I've just been thinking today, Jules and John, how much you've done for this community, for New Mexico, in a mere 10 years. The network that you've created and the support for poets and teachers is really pretty amazing. So I have much admiration and gratitude for that. So I have 20 minutes to read. I am going to read from both of my books, from Sting and Nest and from To Cleave. And I'm also going to read some newer poems, most of which were written during this pandemic time. So the first poem that I'll read is called "In Which the poet addresses lack. And like many writers I know, there was kind of a surge of creativity when we were locked down or locked in, or however you want to say it. And then for me, nothing. I stopped writing. And most writers know that terrible, discomforting feeling. So this was a poem that broke me out of not writing. It's a poem about not writing, in which the poet addresses lack. Dear hostage, dear interruption, dear unspent ink, dear kitchen of half-baked, unrisen, and refusal to set, dear poems that once upon a current tumbled cold and clear, dear shy tremble, dear bitter, best I can do, yearning and plea. Once I was and am no longer. Lost dream, last chance, hoard and rot, snippet, fragment, phrase that came to naught, knots that will not unravel. Once grease and salve. I am fumble, distractible, and doubt. Buffet of too many dishes, what my mother knew by heart, what my daughter improvised. My plate grows cold, waiting to be prayed over. Chef nor poet, I puzzle what might nourish, spin imagination, and heal. Bleary, inundated reader, weary, COVID-rankled muse. What world needs more words? So thankfully, I found more words after being discouraged. Fall has suddenly descended on New Mexico, just really in the last 48 hours. It's cold and we're about to get rain. So I thought I would read some fall poems. And the first two are from this book, Sting and Nest. I don't know if you can see it. This poem is called Last Havoc of Color. I wake with wreckage on my lips and my body like wet snow. No, caught in deep drifts in which my knees lock, arms paddling air, thick with fog. It's a season of fugitives, everything giving up splendor. My eyes fill at the mention of prayer, at fallen peaches split with ants, a lost and found friend who wants to try again, and the surprise of rain. In the desert, the last havoc of color turns scrub jays directionless, can't get enough piñon nut and berry, dart and covet. Do we hoard what we're afraid of? Stripped trees, emptied nest, heart, a drawer full of ash. This time of year has lots of resonance for me. It's the time of year that my mother died. And when I wrote this book, she was alive, but I knew she was dying. And it was fall in New England. And she lived on a lake that is one of my spiritual homes. And this poem is titled, Soon My Mother Will Die. The season is designed with dark letters, eaves guttered with wet leaves, and the rank wit fall offers. Like her, slack-skinned, it stretches a thin hand over root-ridged paths to the lake, which, like a polished plate, waits for decoration, for its edges to be trellised with gold leaf and ash. Lake of the last house, motherless and unafraid, luminous like her creased cheek, like leaves flattened to the sole of my shoes, the imprint of her long walk presses into mine. Maple tinged sky, so clear it might be lying. So I really delved for fall poems. This is not so much a fall poem, but it seemed to fit. This is from my newer book, To Cleave, that I'm so grateful UNM Press published. The poem includes a Hebrew word, ruach, which translates as breath of God or wind. Absence of wind. Windless dawn reties her sash. What has fallen remains fallen. What has splintered will not be sutured. Windless noon, tides recede, nothing strewn, nothing stolen. A small room opens its door. One thought, two breaths. What does a body do robbed of velocity? How does a throat bereft of ruah shape its plea? Night, star-becalmed and reluctant to speak, a cry shudders dark grasses, bone cracks between teeth. Give me the brow absent of doubt and need, arms hung useless, sails collapsed. In the trees, no rustle and bough. In the field, no one flees, no disaster rising at sea. Ruah, what quavers the throat's dark coil and returns to it, song. Let fever lift, may the pond rest unriffled. May the blossoms be given one more day to be praised. So this is a poem about my New Mexico landscape, but it includes some nostalgia for my younger days when I played soccer and field hockey in New England. And at the end of our practice, which would end as the sun was setting, we would be given this bushel basket of apples and we would eat them as the sun set. So, but the coyote is a local right near my home. The coyote. The coyote came close enough. The dogs were a racket of wanting a bigger bite of wildness. Hunger slowed. The coyote slunk into rusting brush, and we went inside, craving evidence, blood, stench, fur. Certain I'd heard her teeth meet rabbit bone as we watched, night lit by the neighbor's porch. Back behind orange rectangles of glass, our songless talk, slippered feet. The tea kettle imitated nothing of tendon tear, its shrilling, no scar on the dark. All night, the dry aspens scratched ancient texts above our bed. All night, his breath was creased notes pressed into my pillow, and our dog's musty huff filled the intervals of ticking, leaving nothing but my heart's heft of wet apples, memory of a red-kneed girl running the length of a blank autumn field, chasing a white ball, sweat, promise of something crisp and fallen to bite into. So one more fall poem. I lived in in New York State for a number of years when my daughters were very young. And I was left with the task of selling our house after my husband had come to New Mexico to start a new job. 2 young children, dozens of trees, lots of leaves that needed to be raked. I would rake over 20 bags of leaves. And as anybody who has lived with young children understands, there's great relief in getting away from them. This is called The Raker is Burning. A dozen piles I did not invite my small daughters to jump or build rooms or imagine a house. Kitchen of dead umber, table of crimson. I raked the undone elms, shedding maples. Floor of paper, flame under stew, a locked door. For sale, tagged the house, over with. Town of white pickets, stone walls I'd leave, dusk turning green to scarlet. My socks filled with bits of it, their picky habits, torn pages. I might have fallen back into it, one hill of the village I'd made, sun puzzling through bare branches. I might have lit a match. Okay, so like a lot of you writers listening, there have been the poems that were inspired by this strange time that we've been living through. And this first one I'm going to read is a poem that I wrote when we were first locked down or sheltered in place or quarantined. I think I like shelter in place best. It includes 2 Hebrew words. One is tiferet, which means harmony, and the other is chesed, which means loving kindness. There was pause. There was pause, and the humans were afraid, and grasses in the meadow were still, and hawks who loved to hunt small creatures circled, and pews barren of bodies infected with yesterday's prayers exhaled. Hymnals frayed with bewilderment released a scent of sorrow, and what had not been memorized stayed shut. Outside the open door, beyond the worn stone steps, air moved. Birds, blustery with spring lust, ransacked back lots and alleys for sticks and dead grass. Humans, so hidden, it was as if cloud and root and hill demanded, stay back, stay away, stay in. Face your smeared windows, your unread holy texts. There will be rearrangement of angels, animals, and humankind. Order inclined toward insect, ocean, and oak. Reckon with and return when you have learned tiferet, chesed. Then open your door, curl your shoulders down, walk as it is commanded by beast and breeze and blue-black dusk into remnants of holiness and grace. So this next poem was inspired by all those loaves of bread that we were seeing on the internet that everybody was baking except me, but I was eating a lot of it. And this is called Bread in the Time of COVID-19. Spelt, levain, bouche, cracked arc, golden yurt, baguette's bark canoe, challah's fat hips, unbraid and eat in a dark kitchen, in bed under cover, on the back step at dawn. It's relentless, craving, as if breast, as if moss and mountain, as if cool walking, pond and dew. Black bread of my ancestors, manna that bandages, banned non-essential, mold inducer, cause of the doughy midriff. Multi-seed and local, equal opportunity, factory bagged and trucked cross state, waited in line for neighbor to neighbor bread. Fill our rooms with rising, scent of a future, eyes closed, teeth into Christ bread, Jehovah bread, bread of Allah, bread of children, bread of refusal, bread of my seclusion and yours. Oh, crust, tough as a belt that holds us together, crisp as ice that shatters into song. Yeast, water, salt, what Moses survived without. I am ravenous. Loaf of COVID, loaf of grief, loaf of what's offered and what's stolen. May there be bread of a new year. Challah, round as a labyrinth strewn with cinnamon and raisins. Maze of our craving, bread of our saving. And my last poem is called Prayer Eventually. A black bear roams my neighborhood, topples hives, pushes through fences. Drunk on water set out for birds, honeybees, hover sage, burrow bacopa. It is the summer of 2020. The snake that curves my window is Pituophis catenifer, lover of gopher, mouse, and egg. Quail hustle plumed young from pinion cover into danger. Hummingbirds use terror tactics to force fellow feeders from nectar. A lone coyote sidles the far field. Hungry, we watch finch nestlings fledge. Walking, we count lizard, 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 fenced tree, whiptail. One common cottontail, one crushed kit. A neighbor's night camera records bobcat, raccoon, deer, mephitis, mephitis, night after night, its musk plagues our sheets. My black and white mud, moonlit dervish howls at a mystery I can neither hear nor see. A half moon reddens, retreats behind clouds. I refrain from comparing to anything. In dream, I point, say to my husband, great blue heron. Its feathered crest, wind-racked, its long legs knee-cobbled and thin. Months we have been forced home. We list, embellish, make of shrunken habitat a praise poem. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. We can all unmute and do a round of applause here.
Yes, yeah, bravo.
Brava, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Barbara, your language is so exquisite that I could listen to you all night long, and especially love the pandemic seclusion poems. You know. Yeah, amazing. So yeah,
So
I
much.
also had the experience of writing a lot when it first started, and then not.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah. So, and look forward to, being able to hear you read in person one of these days.
It would be fantastic. Thank you so
Good.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
and I
you.
just want to mention, we put the links to Barbara's books in the chat, so support poetry. If you don't have those already, you can order direct through those sites or through your local bookstore. And then we're also
Yep.
taking donations for the poets on the site as well. On
Yes.
our site.
Support your local poet or your local visiting poet. Yeah, thank you. All right, so our next poet, Loren Niemi, is from, as I mentioned before, is from Minnesota. But he, I believe, went to high school in Albuquerque, grade school in Albuquerque. So, and he comes back often. He'll be staying here, house sitting here for several months, and we'll be doing the chatter in November, end of November. So hopefully he'll be doing some other readings around town as well. And Loren is nationally known storyteller as well as poet. He's also been a slam champion. He's participated in over 200 poetry and story slams since 1995, has won 71 first, second, or third places and 2 grand slams, as well as being a member of the Minnesota team for the 1998 National Poetry Slam. He's done performances at 32 fringe festivals in 8 cities, which is amazing, and also taken part in a lot of storytelling conventions and pageants and so forth. He's has published What Haunts Us, a collection of non-traditional ghost stories, which won a 2020 Midwest Book Award. Also, 2 poetry chapbooks, Coyote Flies Coach from Sister Black Press, and Vote Coyote from Austin Nash Studio. Also the award-winning The New Book of Plots and its companion Point of View and the Emotional Arc of Stories. And I know there's more. Also co-authored with Elizabeth Ellis, the critically acclaimed Inviting the Wolf In, Thinking About Difficult Stories, which is a really interesting book. So we're so happy that Loren is able to join us in person. Loren Niemi.
All right, okay.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks, Jules. Let me make the couple of pitches first. This is What Haunts Us. Little gold seal here, designating it as a Midwest Publishers Prize winner, right? That book, I'm not going to do anything from that book. This is Vote Coyote. What Haunts Us and all the other books are available through Amazon or through my website. Vote Coyote is not. Vote Coyote is strictly an in-person kind of thing. But I'm going to start off with 2 poems from Vote Coyote. Coyote on campaign contributions. Jackson was a racist and worse, undeserving of a face on paper that pays for progress. So folks, renounce him and I'll dispose of his shame for you. Grant was a racist and a drunk to boot. What kind of representation does he offer for the hardworking folks like you? Look, I'll dispose of his sins as well. Now, Franklin was the best of the lot, though a womanizer from Philadelphia to Paris and back again, but trust him to me, and I'll prove his industriousness. No one wants to ask you to give more than you can afford, except for certain preachers. But because I am not cut from the same cloth, you don't need to pray when you give me something like that which is owed to Caesar, because it goes directly from your hand to mine to whatever greases the wheels of progress. Coyote's sage advice. I stand on the cusp of not knowing I cannot change the past, but believing lessons learned will guide me to a better outcome. Old Coyote says, that's not exactly how it works. That's not at all how the world works. We make the same mistakes over and over until we fail better, often enough to stop taking that convenient fork in the road to ruin. I should know. I still have pages earmarked in the Acme catalog of whiz-bang gizmos, guaranteed to thrill. Barbara did fall poems. I'm going to do here's a little fall story. I'm going to do a couple of stories here as we go on. This story is really an old one. This is one of the first stories I think I ever really told. I must have been 6, maybe. I hadn't started grade school when this happened. I was over at my friend Tony's house. We were playing in the leaves. His older brother, was raking the leaves into a pile, and Tony and I would run screaming and jump into them, throw them into the air, chase each other around with handfuls of leaves, laughing. It was one of those fall days when the sun came through the trees golden. The leaves tingled with delight. They separated and came down to meet the rake. The boyfriend's brother, or the boyfriend's girlfriend, the brother's girlfriend came to visit, and the brother stopped raking. I didn't pay any attention to her. I didn't even know her name. All I knew was that she was sitting on the steps wearing a pink sweater. He wanted to impress her, and so he took the rake. It was an old-fashioned rake with metal tines at the end and a long handle. And he tilted his head back and he put the handle of the rake on his chin and the tines up in the air as though he were going to rake the clouds. He gestured back and forth, and she laughed. The handle of the rake left his chin, and it seemed to me to go up really, really tremendously slowly, slow motion. The handle went up and the head turned and came down and hit him in the forehead. He crumpled to the ground. He was laying there. He popped his head off of the tines and there was blood spurting out of his head. And the girlfriend screamed, and pretty soon his mother came, and his mother screamed. His mother picked him up. He was a big guy, but she picked him up and she was running down the street with him in her arms. And the girlfriend was running down the street with her hands cupped under his head, catching his blood as though it would have some use. Tommy and I were standing there. No one thought of us. And we went over and we looked at the rake. And I looked at the blood running from the rake onto those yellow leaves. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really beautiful. Years later, older, after Albuquerque, when I went to junior high in upper New York State in Hamburg, just outside of Buffalo. We lived on a cul-de-sac, 6, 8 houses, in a circle at the end of a little road, forest on one side, farm on the other. The farm was George Wheeler's farm. So one day, my brother John and myself and the Tracy boys who lived next door to us, Sonny and Quickie, I do not know his actual name. Nobody in his family ever called him anything but Quickie. We were there with George Wheeler. We were up in the hayloft. We were smoking cigarettes that had been stolen from Sonny's mother. We were practicing being men, holding cigarettes the way we saw them do it in the movies. Sometimes, the way they would cup them in the hand so that the snipers couldn't see the light. And we were generally lying about girls because in 8th grade, none of us really had any experience with girls, but we all claimed to. When all of a sudden, I don't remember if it was George or I don't remember if it was Sonny. One of them said, "Look at this." And he took his cigarette and in an elegant move, flicked it. And the cigarette went up in a long arc, up into the shadow of the ceiling and down and down and down with a little red trail of sparks down into the hay. And a little puff of smoke came up and a little flame. And before someone could think to do something, the barn was on fire. And we dived out of the hayloft, and rather than put the fire out, we ran out the back door. We ran to the bushes. We threw ourselves in the bushes and watched the smoke rising from the barn. And pretty soon the flames rising from the barn. And pretty soon there came the volunteer fire department with the guy who was the dentist, who was also the chief of the volunteer fire department, still in his whites, in the front, holding onto the cab. And they pulled up and they started taking out hoses and spraying the barn. And my brother says, you know, if we weren't guilty, we would be there watching. And Quickie said, we should be there. And so we did. We crawled out from underneath the bushes and we went and we stood by, well, a respectful distance to watch the firemen do their work. The shadow of doom appeared. George's father. And the shadow of doom had hands that were the biggest hands I had ever seen. And the shadow of doom reached down and plucked from George's pocket a cigarette. The shadow of doom said, "Where did you get this?" And George pointed to me, and I pointed to my brother, and my brother pointed to Quickie, and Quickie pointed to Sonny, and Sonny had nowhere to go, so he pointed back to George. George's father crushed that cigarette into tiny little bits of tobacco floating down like miniature leaves. And he said, "Boys, you've had enough fun for the day. Go home and wait. I will call your parents." And we ran home. I will tell you this, the anticipation of the phone call was worse than any punishment that could happen. Because every time the phone rang, I would freeze up. Every phone call, every ring could possibly be that one. And I don't know if Mr. Wheeler didn't care or didn't think or thought it was enough. Or if he did call him, my father didn't say anything or my mother didn't say anything. As far as I know, there never was a call. There only was the guilt that I felt, the resolution I felt that I wouldn't smoke again. I would like to say the story has a happy ending. Perhaps it does. Mr. Wheeler got a brand new barn from the insurance. George said that he got restricted to home for a couple of weeks and had to spend extra time doing chores. Sonny and Quickie and my brother and myself, we had no consequence we could think of other than the knowledge. But what was interesting about it is that I did have every intention of not smoking. And I didn't smoke for a long time until I met some girl who thought smoking was cool. So one more, and then this will be the last thing I'm going to do. Many years later, when I was living on the farm in Winona, or as the people in Winona would say, who are down in the valley, living on that commune, that hippie place. And I got to tell you something about the farm. The farm, I mean, I had not made the decision to go there, to live there. I mean, when I arrived in Winona to do the work I was going to do, the people who I was going to do the work with had already found the farm and already made the arrangements. And this place was broken down. I mean, there was no running water. There was pump water. There was an outhouse. There was no central heat. Well, there was central heat in the sense that there was a stove in the kitchen, a wood burning stove, and that was the heat. There was electricity in one room, the kitchen, with one socket and one light bulb. There didn't appear to be any insulation in the walls, although there were plenty of mice. And in the winter, we'd pile up hay bales on the outside. Or, you know. We paid $100 in the summer and nothing in December. And then as the heat came up, the rent went up. So why would we there? We were there because Gregory, who was one of the people I worked with and a man who I greatly came to admire, was in love with the stars. And when he came to look at the farm, he came in the afternoon and he stood on the bluff and saw that from where the farm was, the slope went down to the Great Valley, to the ditch of time, to the Mississippi, and across on the far horizon, you could see Wisconsin. But he came back at night and he stood at the same spot and he could see the great dome of heaven with the stars uncluttered by city lights. Well, there was a farm across the way, but that guy, he went to bed at 8 o'clock at night because he milked in the morning and he shut off his yard lights. And so every night, Gregory could stand there and commune with the stars. And that was why we were in that farmhouse. So this one time, this one fall equinox, you know, that coming, that balance between summer and winter, that moment where if you take an egg and you actually put it on end, it stands. One fall equinox, Gregory says to me, walk with me, and we go out past the barn and past the cistern and down the road a ways. And on one side, there's corn. It hasn't been harvested yet, but it's getting close. And on the other side, there's the pasture falling down towards the river with cows contentedly chewing their cud. And we came to a particular point, and Gregory said, I want you to observe the turning of the world. He pointed to the sun and he said, from the time the sun touches the horizon to the time it is beneath the horizon, 2 minutes, 45 seconds. But what you need to know is that the sun doesn't sink. It remains fixed, immutable. That feeling, that look of sinking is because the earth turns and we are turning away from the sun. We are turning backwards. We are on a great ball that is falling backwards to night, to darkness, to the embrace of moon. And I said, wow, that's amazing. And he said, here, stand. And so I stood next to him with my feet firmly planted, and I let myself feel it. Feel the earth rotating backwards and the sun slipping away, and the purple of night rising up behind me to take its space. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Hey, Lauren. Yes, you can applaud if you'd like, folks. And yeah.
Yay, Lauren.
Very nice, Lauren.
Very
Thank you.
nice.
Thank you. Lovely.
Okay.
And thank you, especially for helping us experience the turning of the earth. Yeah. Anyway, always a delight to hear you. Just always mesmerizing stories. And if you do get a chance to hear him in person, it is a whole different experience, as he was saying earlier, when you have a live audience. And not that you are not a good audience, but you know what I mean. So chatter, and he'll also be doing some other performances around
And a workshop.
Yes, which I think Jules has put into the into the chatter, so
Yeah.
into the chat. Okay, good. All right. Thanks, everybody. I see some other folks here. Kitty Jospe from Rochester, New York, and Charles Powell from Albuquerque, Holly Wilson, Albuquerque. Mess, hey Mess, one of our first open mic people when we started doing it at the brewery. And Teo Walker from Albuquerque, Johanna is